Nestled between rolling green hills and thick forests, the small town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew each other. It had a population of just over 5,000 people, and life there moved at a slow, predictable pace. People greeted one another warmly on the streets, children played freely in the parks, and neighbors helped each other without hesitation. To outsiders, Willow Creek seemed like the perfect picture of peace and harmony. But beneath its calm surface lay whispers of discontent, whispers that grew louder whenever Deputy Sheriff Richard Hargrove's name came up. Richard Hargrove had been part of the Willow Creek Sheriff's Department for 22 years. He started as an eager young officer fresh out of the academy, full of promises to serve and protect. Over time, however, his attitude changed. What began as harmless grumpiness turned into something darker. Richard became known for his sharp tongue, quick temper, and prejudiced views. Many residents felt uneasy around him, especially those from minority communities or lower-income families. They noticed how he treated them differently during traffic stops, interrogations, or even casual encounters. Some claimed he made snide remarks about their appearance, accent, or background. Others said he ignored calls for help if they didn't fit his idea of worthwhile cases. Despite these complaints, nothing ever stuck against Richard. His position gave him power, and his connections within the department shielded him from consequences. A few brave souls tried filing formal grievances, but their efforts went nowhere. The sheriff himself, a man named Carl Briggs, dismissed the allegations as misunderstandings or exaggerations. "Richard's tough, sure," Carl would say, "but he gets results." And so, Richard continued to patrol the streets of Willow Creek, enforcing his version of justice. For most of the townsfolk, avoiding Richard became second nature. If you saw his patrol car coming down the road, you crossed to the other side of the street. If you heard his voice at the grocery store, you ducked into another aisle. People tolerated him because they believed speaking out would only make things worse. After all, who wanted to anger someone with a badge and a gun? So they kept quiet, hoping someone else would step forward instead. But not everyone could avoid Richard forever. For Walter Grayson, a 78-year-old widower living on the outskirts of town, fate had other plans. Walter had spent nearly 4 decades working as a mechanic before retiring to live a quiet life in his modest farmhouse. He loved tending to his garden, feeding the birds, and reminiscing about the old days with anyone willing to listen. Neighbors admired Walter for his kindness and wisdom. They often stopped by to chat or ask for advice, knowing he always had a story to share. Walter rarely interacted with law enforcement. In fact, the last time he'd spoken to a police officer was over 10 years ago when a stray dog wandered onto his property. That's why it came as a shock when Richard showed up at his doorstep one chilly autumn evening. Walter had no idea what was about to happen, or how this encounter would change the course of his life and the entire town, forever. That night, everything seemed normal at first. Walter had finished dinner and decided to sweep the fallen leaves off his porch. The air smelled of pine and earth, and the sky glowed orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. As he worked, he thought about calling his granddaughter Emily, who lived 2 hours away. She hadn't visited in months, and he missed her laughter and hugs. Lost in thought, Walter barely noticed the sound of tires crunching on gravel until a spotlight shone directly in his face. Blinking against the glare, he squinted to see a black and white patrol car parked at the edge of his driveway. Out stepped Richard Hargrove, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading light. Walter straightened up, leaning on his broom for support. "Evening, Deputy," he said politely, though unease prickled at the back of his neck. Richard didn't return the greeting. Instead, he marched toward Walter with a scowl etched across his face. "We got a noise complaint about your place," Richard barked, his tone accusatory. "What's going on here?" Walter blinked in confusion. Noise complaint? From his little farmhouse? "I don't know what you mean," he replied honestly. "It's just me and my dog here. Maybe the wind rattled the shutters." He gestured vaguely toward the house where a few wooden boards hung loose. Walter had meant to fix them weeks ago, but money was tight, and he'd prioritized paying bills over home repairs. Richard's eyes narrowed. You're telling me you didn't hear anything unusual? He demanded, stepping closer. Walter took a cautious step back, gripping the broom tighter. No, sir, he answered softly. Just the usual sounds of the country. The deputy's jaw tightened. Something about Walter's calm demeanor irritated him. How dare this old man act so casual while he wasted his time? Richard's patience snapped. Listen here, old-timer, he growled, jabbing a finger in Walter's direction. If I get called out here again, you better have a damn good explanation, got it? Walter nodded quickly, eager to defuse the situation. Yes, sir, of course. But Richard wasn't done. He grabbed Walter's arm roughly, yanking him forward. And maybe next time you'll think twice about letting your place fall apart, he sneered. Pain shot through Walter's frail body as Richard's grip tightened. Panic bubbled in his chest. This wasn't right. This wasn't fair. All he'd done was sweep leaves off his porch. Neighbors who happened to glance outside saw flashes of movement under the dim porch light. One couple hurried over, alarmed by the raised voices. By the time they reached the scene, Walter was crumpled on the ground, clutching his bruised arm, while Richard stood towering above him, breathing heavily. The damage was done, and word spread fast. Within hours, the entire town knew what had happened, and opinions were divided. Some defended Richard, claiming he was just doing his job. Others sided with Walter, outraged that such cruelty could happen in their peaceful community. Little did anyone realize, this incident marked the beginning of a storm that would rock Willow Creek to its core. For years, Richard's behavior had gone unchecked, hidden behind badges and excuses. Now, thanks to one elderly man's courage and the collective determination of the townsfolk, a reckoning loomed on the horizon. Would justice prevail? Or would fear and complacency win out? Once again, only time would tell. The night of the incident began like any other in Willow Creek. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of burning firewood from nearby chimneys. Families gathered around dinner tables, sharing stories about their day, while teenagers lounged on porches, scrolling through their phones. It seemed impossible that anything could disrupt the tranquility of this small town. But as fate would have it, a routine call to investigate a minor noise complaint spiraled into something far more sinister and unforgettable. Dispatch received the initial report shortly after sunset. A resident living near Walter Grayson's farmhouse claimed to have heard strange noises coming from the property. It sounded like banging, the caller explained nervously over the phone. Maybe someone trying to break in? Though vague, the complaint warranted attention, especially since burglaries had been reported in rural areas recently. Without hesitation, the dispatcher assigned the task to Deputy Richard Hargrove, who happened to be patrolling nearby. When Richard arrived at Walter's house, he didn't expect much. Noise complaints were common in sleepy towns like Willow Creek, often caused by animals, weather, or malfunctioning equipment. Still, Richard approached every assignment with the same intensity, as if each one held the potential for disaster. His patrol car kicked up dust as he turned onto the gravel driveway, its headlights illuminating the modest white farmhouse nestled among towering oak trees. Walter stood on the porch, sweeping leaves into a neat pile. He looked harmless enough, but Richard wasn't interested in appearances. To him, everyone was guilty until proven innocent. "Evening, Deputy," Walter greeted cautiously, leaning on his broom. The spotlight from the patrol car blinded him momentarily, and he squinted against the glare. Richard stepped out of the vehicle without acknowledging the greeting. His boots crunched on the gravel as he strode toward the porch, his posture rigid and unapproachable. "We got a noise complaint about your place," he announced gruffly, skipping pleasantries altogether. "What's going on here?" Walter blinked, caught off guard by the abruptness of the question. "Noise complaint?" he repeated, scratching his head. "I haven't heard anything unusual. Maybe the wind rattled the shutters again." He gestured vaguely toward the side of the house where a few wooden boards hung loose. Walter had planned to fix them weeks ago, but financial constraints forced him to delay the repairs. Richard's expression darkened. "You're telling me You didn't hear anything? He demanded, taking another step closer. His voice carried an edge of disbelief and irritation. Walter shook his head slowly. No, sir. Just the usual sounds of the country. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Crickets chirped in the background and the cool breeze rustled the leaves scattered across the porch. Then, without warning, Richard snapped. Something about Walter's calm demeanor infuriated him. Perhaps it was the old man's apparent lack of concern. Or maybe it was simply Richard's own biases bubbling to the surface. Whatever the reason, his patience evaporated in an instant. You think this is some kind of joke? Richard growled, jabbing a finger inches from Walter's. Farms people don't make complaints unless there's a damn good reason. Walter flinched, gripping the broom tighter. I'm not joking, Deputy, he said softly, trying to keep his tone even. I honestly don't know what you're talking about. But Richard wasn't listening. His frustration boiled over into anger, and before Walter could react, the deputy grabbed his arm roughly. If I get called out here again, you better have a damn good explanation. Richard snarled, yanking Walter forward. Pain shot through the elderly man's body as Richard's grip tightened like a vice. Walter winced, his knees buckling under the sudden force. Please let go, he pleaded, his voice trembling. You're hurting me. Richard ignored the plea. Instead, he shoved Walter against the wooden railing of the porch, causing it to groan under the impact. And maybe next time you'll think twice about letting your place fall apart, he spat, releasing his hold. Walter stumbled backward, clutching his bruised arm. For a brief second, fear paralyzed him. This wasn't how interactions with law enforcement were supposed to go. Hadn't he always followed the rules? Paid his taxes? Kept to himself? What had he done to deserve this? Neighbors watching from their windows couldn't believe what they were seeing. One couple, hearing the commotion, rushed outside to investigate. They found Walter sitting on the porch steps, pale and shaken, while Richard stood nearby, breathing heavily. Is everything okay? The woman asked hesitantly, glancing between the two men. Walter nodded weakly, too stunned to speak. Richard glared at her, daring her to intervene. Everything's fine, he muttered, straightening his uniform. Just doing my job. By the time backup officers arrived, word of the altercation had spread like wildfire. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering anxiously about what they'd witnessed or heard. Some recorded video footage from their phones, capturing snippets of the chaotic scene. Others comforted Walter, offering blankets and water. Despite his injuries, the elderly man insisted he was all right. But the haunted look in his eyes told a different story. As news of the incident traveled through Willow Creek, shock rippled through the community. How could someone sworn to protect and serve behave so violently? Was this really the same deputy who had patrolled their streets for decades? Questions swirled and accusations flew. Many residents felt betrayed, wondering how they had allowed such behavior to fester unchecked for so long. Others defended Richard, arguing that he must have had a valid reason for acting the way he did. After all, wasn't he just following protocol? Yet evidence painted a damning picture. Security camera footage from a neighbor's property showed Richard grabbing Walter forcefully, shoving him against the railing and striking him across the face. Eyewitness accounts corroborated the video, describing the deputy's aggressive behavior in vivid detail. Even those initially hesitant to criticize Richard found themselves questioning his actions. Could anyone justify assaulting a defenseless senior citizen? The fallout was swift and severe. State investigators launched an inquiry into Richard's conduct, reviewing past cases where similar allegations had surfaced. Complaints dating back years resurfaced, painting a troubling pattern of misconduct. Former colleagues spoke out, revealing instances of racial profiling, favoritism, and verbal abuse. One ex-officer described Richard as someone who believed he was above the law, using his badge as a shield against accountability. Public trust in local law enforcement plummeted, forcing Sheriff Carl Briggs to issue a public apology and promise reforms within the department. Meanwhile, Walter pressed charges against Richard, supported by overwhelming evidence. His decision sent ripples through the town, inspiring others to come forward with their own stories of mistreatment. For the first time, people realized they weren't alone in feeling intimidated or wronged by Richard's actions. A movement began to take shape, a collective demand for justice and transparency. Protesters gathered outside the sheriff's office, holding signs that read, "Enough is enough and protect our elders." Students skipped school to join marches, chanting slogans and demanding change. Local media covered the protests extensively, shining a spotlight on systemic issues plaguing Willow Creek's law enforcement. Reporters interviewed victims, activists, and experts, amplifying calls for reform. Even longtime supporters of the police department began questioning whether Richard deserved to wear the badge. Amidst the chaos, Walter emerged as an unlikely symbol of resilience. Though physically battered, his spirit remained unbroken. Friends and family rallied around him, offering support and encouragement. Strangers stopped by his house to express solidarity, bringing food, flowers, and heartfelt notes. Walter, touched by their kindness, vowed to fight not only for himself but also for others who had suffered in silence. "This isn't just about me," he told reporters during a rare interview. "It's about standing up for what's right no matter how hard it gets." Back at the sheriff's office, tensions ran high. Richard, placed on administrative leave pending investigation, refused to admit wrongdoing. In private conversations, he blamed Walter for resisting authority and accused the townsfolk of exaggerating the situation. Yet public opinion continued to shift against him. Once respected, even feared, Richard now faced isolation and scorn. Colleagues avoided him, fearing guilt by association. Friends distanced themselves, unwilling to defend his actions. Even his family struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the image portrayed in headlines and protests. As days turned into weeks, the case dominated conversations in Willow Creek. People debated Richard's fate, speculated about potential outcomes, and reflected on broader issues of power, privilege, and accountability. Some hoped the incident would serve as a wake-up call, prompting meaningful change within the department. Others worried that removing one bad actor wouldn't address deeper-rooted problems. Regardless of their stance, everyone agreed on one thing: the quiet town of Willow Creek would never be the same again. The days following the incident at Walter Grayson's farmhouse felt like a storm brewing over Willow Creek. What started as a minor noise complaint had spiraled into something no one could have predicted, an event that exposed deep cracks in the town's foundation of trust and justice. As details of Richard Hargrove's violent behavior spread, shockwaves rippled through every corner of the community. Conversations buzzed in coffee shops, grocery stores, and church pews. Parents whispered warnings to their children about encounters with law enforcement. Even longtime defenders of the sheriff's department found themselves questioning whether they'd turned a blind eye for too long. For Walter, life became a whirlwind of media attention, legal proceedings, and emotional turmoil. Despite his frailty, he agreed to press charges against Richard, knowing it was the right thing to do, not just for himself but for everyone who had suffered silently under the deputy's abuse. "I'm not afraid anymore," Walter told his granddaughter Emily during one of her visits. "If I don't stand up now, who will?" Emily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She admired her grandfather's courage, but worried about the toll it might take on him. At 78 years old, Walter wasn't invincible. The bruises on his arms were fading, but the trauma lingered in his sleepless nights and cautious glances whenever a patrol car passed by. Investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the events of that fateful evening. Security footage from a neighbor's camera provided undeniable proof of Richard's aggression. In grainy yet clear images, viewers could see the deputy grabbing Walter, shoving him against the railing, and striking him across the face. Eyewitness testimonies added weight to the evidence, describing how Richard ignored Walter's pleas and showed no mercy despite the man's obvious vulnerability. One witness, a young mother named Lisa Carter, recounted how she ran outside after hearing shouting. "It was horrifying," she said in an interview. "This poor old man was being treated like a criminal. For what? Loose shutters?" As outrage grew, So did public demands for accountability. Protesters continued to gather outside the sheriff's office, holding signs and chanting slogans. Some marchers wore T-shirts emblazoned with Walter's name, turning his struggle into a symbol of resistance. Local leaders joined the movement, calling for sweeping reforms within the department. "This isn't just about one bad deputy," Mayor Patricia Reynolds declared during a town hall meeting. "It's about addressing systemic issues that allow such behavior to happen in the first place." Richard, meanwhile, remained defiant. Placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation, he refused to apologize or acknowledge any wrongdoing. In interviews with internal investigators, he claimed Walter had provoked him by resisting authority and failing to cooperate. "He was disrespectful," Richard insisted, his tone laced with indignation. "I was just doing my job." These statements only fueled public anger, as many saw them as excuses rather than explanations. How could anyone justify assaulting a defenseless senior citizen? Did Richard truly believe his actions were justified? Or was he incapable of seeing the harm he caused? The case quickly gained national attention, drawing reporters and activists to Willow Creek. Television crews set up cameras near the courthouse, capturing residents' reactions and documenting protests. Social media exploded with hashtags like "Justice for Walter" and "Accountability Now," amplifying calls for reform beyond the small town's borders. For some, the story resonated deeply, reminding them of similar injustices they'd witnessed or experienced firsthand. Others viewed it as a wake-up call, a stark reminder that unchecked power often leads to abuse. Behind the scenes, prosecutors prepared for what promised to be a high-profile trial. They built a strong case against Richard, relying on video footage, eyewitness accounts, and expert testimony about excessive force. Defense attorneys countered by arguing that Richard acted under extreme provocation, though they struggled to substantiate their claims. Legal experts predicted a lengthy and contentious battle, with both sides determined to win. Amidst the chaos, Walter tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. He tended to his garden, fed the birds, and visited neighbors, who stopped by to check on him. Yet beneath his calm exterior lay a mix of emotions: anger, fear, determination, and hope. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also understood the importance of standing firm. "If this helps even one person feel safer," he told a reporter, "then it'll all be worth it." Support poured in from unexpected places. A local charity organized a fundraiser to cover Walter's medical expenses and legal fees. Donations came from across the country, accompanied by heartfelt letters of encouragement. Strangers sent cards and gifts, filling Walter's mailbox with messages of solidarity. One letter, written by a young boy, read simply, "Thank you for being brave." It brought tears to Walter's eyes. At the same time, tensions simmered within the sheriff's department. Sheriff Carl Briggs faced mounting pressure to address the situation head-on. Critics accused him of enabling Richard's behavior by ignoring past complaints. Supporters urged him to defend the department's integrity while acknowledging the need for change. Caught between competing interests, Carl announced plans for mandatory training programs focused on de-escalation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and ethical conduct. He also pledged to review hiring practices and implement stricter oversight measures. While these steps were welcomed, skeptics questioned whether they went far enough. Could reforms truly prevent future abuses, or would they merely serve as temporary fixes? As weeks turned into months, the case dominated conversations in Willow Creek. People debated Richard's fate, speculated about potential outcomes, and reflected on broader issues of power, privilege, and accountability. Some hoped the incident would serve as a catalyst for meaningful change, prompting transparency and fairness within the department. Others worried that removing one bad actor wouldn't address deeper-rooted problems. Regardless of their stance, everyone agreed on one thing: the quiet town of Willow Creek would never be the same again. For Walter, the journey was far from over. Press conferences, court appearances, and endless meetings with lawyers filled his days. Yet through it all, he remained steadfast, drawing strength from the support of his community. He knew the fight wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he wasn't alone. Together, they were challenging a system that had failed them for too long, and So as autumn gave way to winter, the people of Willow Creek braced themselves for what lay ahead. The assault on Walter Grayson had shaken their faith in law enforcement, but it had also ignited a spark of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this tragedy could lead to something greater, a chance to rebuild trust, demand justice, and create a safer, fairer future for everyone. The trial of Deputy Richard Hargrove became the most talked about event in Willow Creek's recent history. For months, residents had speculated about how justice would play out for the man who had once been a towering figure of authority in their town. Now, as the courtroom doors opened and proceedings began, all eyes were fixed on the outcome. Would Richard face consequences for his actions, or would he walk away scot-free, as many feared? On the day the trial started, the courthouse buzzed with energy. Reporters set up cameras outside, capturing every moment as people filed in. Protesters gathered nearby, holding signs that read, "Justice for Walter" and "No more abuse of power." Inside, seats filled quickly, with some arriving hours early to secure a spot. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Many believed this case represented more than just one man's wrongdoing. It symbolized an opportunity to hold law enforcement accountable and demand systemic change. Walter Grayson sat quietly in the front row, flanked by his granddaughter Emily and a close friend. Though frail, he carried himself with quiet dignity. His presence alone spoke volumes. It reminded everyone why they were there. Richard, on the other hand, appeared stoic, almost detached. Dressed in a dark suit instead of his usual uniform, he avoided making eye contact with anyone. Behind him sat a few supporters, mostly former colleagues from the sheriff's department, but their numbers dwindled compared to the crowd rallying for Walter. Prosecutors wasted no time presenting their case. They began with the security footage from the night of the incident, playing it on a large screen for everyone to see. Gasps echoed through the room as viewers watched Richard grab Walter, shove him against the porch railing, and strike him across the face. Even those familiar with the video couldn't help but react. Prosecutors emphasized the disparity in power between the two men, a trained deputy versus a defenseless elderly citizen, and argued that Richard's actions constituted gross misconduct and assault. Eyewitnesses took the stand next, recounting what they had seen and heard that evening. Lisa Carter, the young mother who had rushed outside after hearing shouting, described Richard's aggression in chilling detail. "He didn't look like he was trying to protect anyone," she said firmly. "He looked like he wanted to hurt Mr. Grayson." Another neighbor, an elderly woman named Margaret Hughes, broke down in tears while testifying. "I've lived here my whole life, and I've never seen anything like it," she sobbed. It wasn't right. Expert witnesses added further weight to the prosecution's argument. A forensic psychologist explained how prolonged exposure to stress and prejudice can lead individuals in positions of power to act violently. A retired police officer testified about proper use of force protocols, stating unequivocally that Richard's behavior violated every standard set forth by law enforcement agencies. Each piece of evidence painted a damning picture of a man who abused his authority without remorse. Defense attorneys fought back fiercely, though their arguments often fell flat. They claimed Richard acted under extreme provocation, suggesting Walter had somehow resisted or disrespected him. Yet when pressed for specifics, they struggled to provide concrete examples. Instead, they relied heavily on character witnesses, former co-workers and friends, who described Richard as a dedicated officer who sometimes let his emotions get the better of him. These testimonials did little to sway the jury, especially given the overwhelming evidence stacked against him. As the trial progressed, cracks began to show within the sheriff's department. Sheriff Carl Briggs testified reluctantly, admitting that complaints about Richard's conduct had surfaced over the years, but insisting they were always investigated thoroughly. Under cross-examination, however, prosecutors revealed inconsistencies in these investigations. Records showed that several grievances had been dismissed outright, with little to no follow-up. One particularly damning document detailed a complaint from a Latino family alleging racial profiling during a traffic stop, a claim eerily similar to accusations made against Richard in the past. Public opinion shifted dramatically as the trial unfolded. Those who had initially defended Richard grew quieter, unable to reconcile his actions with their beliefs. Others expressed shame at having turned a blind eye to systemic issues within the department. Conversations around dinner tables and water coolers centered on accountability and reform. Some suggested implementing body cameras for all officers, while others pushed for independent oversight boards to review cases of alleged misconduct. It seemed the entire town was finally ready to confront its uncomfortable truths. After weeks of testimony, closing arguments brought the trial to a dramatic climax. The prosecutor delivered a passionate speech, urging the jury to consider not only the facts of the case but also its broader implications. "This isn't just about one deputy assaulting one man," he declared. "It's about whether we, as a community, are willing to tolerate abuse of power. Are we going to let fear silence us, or will we stand up for what's right?" The defense attorney countered with a plea for leniency, arguing that Richard's actions, while regrettable, stemmed from frustration rather than malice. He implored the jury to remember Richard's decades of service and give him a second chance. But his words rang hollow in light of the evidence presented. When the judge instructed jurors to deliberate, it felt like the entire town held its breath. Deliberations lasted 3 days, during which tensions ran higher than ever. Protesters camped outside the courthouse, refusing to leave until a verdict was reached. Local businesses closed early each day, anticipating potential unrest depending on the outcome. Walter stayed home, surrounded by loved ones, praying for justice. Richard remained secluded, avoiding media attention and speculation. Finally, on the 4th morning, the jury returned with a decision. As the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict, the courtroom fell silent. "We find the defendant, Richard Hargrove, guilty of assault and misconduct," she announced, her voice steady. Cheers erupted among Walter's supporters, while gasps of disbelief came from Richard's side. Tears streamed down Walter's face as he hugged Emily tightly. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to feel relief. Sentencing followed shortly after. Richard received jail time, hefty fines, and permanent revocation of his law enforcement credentials. While some celebrated the ruling as a victory for justice, others questioned whether it truly addressed the root causes of the problem. Critics pointed out that punishing one bad actor wouldn't erase ingrained biases or prevent future abuses. Still, for Walter and those who rallied behind him, the verdict represented hope, a sign that accountability could prevail even against powerful figures. In the weeks following the trial, Willow Creek began the long process of healing. The sheriff's department implemented reforms, including mandatory training programs focused on de-escalation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and ethical conduct. Community forums provided spaces for residents to voice concerns directly to officials, fostering dialogue and transparency. Walter, now recovering from his injuries, emerged as an unlikely champion for change. He spoke at schools and events, urging young people to stand up against injustice and treat everyone with dignity. Life slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, but the lessons learned lingered. People realized that real change required vigilance and courage. And while Richard's downfall served as a cautionary tale, it also reminded everyone that even in the darkest moments, there's always room for redemption and renewal. The guilty verdict against Richard Hargrove sent shockwaves through Willow Creek, but the aftermath of the trial revealed just how deeply divided the town still was. While many celebrated the ruling as a triumph of justice, others questioned whether it truly addressed the systemic issues plaguing the sheriff's department and society at large. For Walter Grayson and his supporters, the conviction marked a hard-fought victory, but for some residents it felt like an incomplete resolution to a much larger problem. In the days following the sentencing, emotions ran high across the community. Protesters outside the courthouse cheered and hugged one another, waving signs that read "Justice prevails" and "No more abuse." Local media hailed the outcome as a turning point, highlighting how a small-town case had sparked national conversations about police accountability, yet not everyone shared in the celebration. A vocal minority argued that Richard had been made into a scapegoat, claiming he was being punished unfairly for doing his job. These defenders pointed to vague notions of provocation and miscommunication, though their arguments lacked substance when confronted with the mountain of evidence presented during the trial. For Richard himself, life took a drastic turn. Stripped of his badge, gun, and freedom, he became a pariah in the town he once policed. Friends and colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone now branded as a criminal. His family struggled to cope, torn between loyalty and shame. Rumors swirled about his behavior behind bars. Some said he remained defiant, lashing out at fellow inmates and guards alike, while others claimed he had withdrawn into silence, consumed by regret. Regardless of the truth, Richard's fall from grace served as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked power and prejudice. Meanwhile, Walter Grayson found himself thrust into an unfamiliar role, that of a symbol. Once a quiet, unassuming man content with tending to his garden and reminiscing about old times, Walter suddenly became the face of resilience and courage. People approached him in stores and on the street, thanking him for standing up to injustice. Letters and gifts continued to pour in from strangers inspired by his bravery. At first, Walter embraced this newfound attention, seeing it as an opportunity to drive meaningful change. But as weeks turned into months, the weight of expectations began to take its toll. "I never wanted this," Walter admitted to Emily during one of their late-night talks. He sat on his porch, gazing at the stars, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "All I wanted was to live my life in peace. Now everyone looks at me like I'm supposed to fix everything." Emily wrapped an arm around her grandfather, offering comfort. "You didn't ask for any of this," she said softly. "But maybe you can help make things better, for yourself and for others." Determined to honor Walter's wishes, the town embarked on a journey toward healing and reform. The sheriff's department implemented sweeping changes aimed at preventing future abuses of power. Mandatory training programs focused on de-escalation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and ethical decision-making became standard for all officers. Independent oversight boards were established to review complaints and ensure transparency. Body cameras were introduced, requiring deputies to record every interaction with the public. These measures sought to rebuild trust. But rebuilding trust takes time, especially in a community scarred by betrayal. Community forums provided a platform for residents to voice concerns directly to law enforcement officials. Held monthly in the town hall, these meetings attracted diverse crowds eager to participate in shaping the future of their town. People spoke candidly about their experiences, sharing stories of mistreatment, fear, and frustration. Some recounted run-ins with Richard. Others described encounters with different officers who exhibited similar biases. Each story added fuel to the growing demand for accountability and fairness. Yet progress wasn't without challenges. Skeptics questioned whether the reforms went far enough, pointing out that policy changes alone couldn't eliminate ingrained prejudices. Critics argued that true transformation required addressing deeper societal issues, poverty, inequality, and lack of education, that contributed to systemic injustices. Others worried that focusing too much on individual cases risked overshadowing broader problems within law enforcement culture. Despite these concerns, most agreed that any step forward was better than standing still. As reforms took shape, Walter emerged as a key figure in advocating for lasting change. Invited to speak at schools, community centers, and even state conferences, he used his platform to share lessons learned from his ordeal. "I'm no hero," he often began, humbly deflecting praise. "I'm just an old man who got caught up in something bigger than myself. But if my story helps even one person feel safer or braver, then it's worth telling." His speeches resonated deeply, particularly among young people. Students listened intently as Walter recounted the night Richard assaulted him, describing both the fear and the resolve that followed. He encouraged them to stand up against injustice, not violently, but with courage and compassion. "Change starts with us," he emphasized. "It starts with treating each other with kindness and respect, no matter who we are or where we come from." Walter's message extended beyond words. He worked closely with local organizations to establish programs aimed at fostering understanding and empathy. One initiative paired students with senior citizens, creating opportunities for intergenerational dialogue. Another brought together law enforcement officers and community members for workshops designed to break down barriers and build mutual trust. Through these efforts, Walter hoped to create a foundation for lasting unity, a town where everyone felt valued and protected. Despite his contributions, Walter remained acutely aware of the work yet to be done. Late at night, as he sat alone on his porch, memories of that fateful evening sometimes crept back into his mind. The sound of Richard's shouting, the pain of being shoved against the railing, the humiliation of feeling powerless, all lingered like shadows haunting his thoughts. Though physically healed, Walter carried emotional scars that would take longer to mend. Therapy sessions helped him process the trauma, but he knew recovery was a lifelong journey. Still, there were moments of hope that reminded him why he kept fighting. Neighbors stopped by regularly to check on him, bringing food, flowers, and heartfelt notes. Children waved excitedly whenever they saw him walking his dog. Even Sheriff Carl Briggs visited occasionally, apologizing for past failures and promising to do better moving forward. These small acts of kindness reassured Walter that change, however slow, was possible. For the rest of Willow Creek, life gradually returned to its familiar rhythm. Streets bustled with activity, families gathered for picnics in the park, and laughter echoed through neighborhoods once again. Yet beneath the surface, the town had changed irrevocably. Conversations about justice, accountability, and equality became commonplace, weaving their way into everyday interactions. People grew more vigilant, holding leaders accountable and demanding transparency. They understood that while the battle against systemic injustice was far from over, every effort counted. And so, as seasons changed and years passed, Willow Creek continued to evolve. The scars left by Richard Hargrove's actions remained visible, serving as reminders of both the darkness humanity could inflict and the light it could shine in response. For Walter Grayson and countless others, the fight for justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about building a world where such wrongs couldn't happen in the first place. Months after Richard Hargrove's sentencing, Willow Creek began to settle into a new rhythm. The town had survived the storm of controversy, but its people knew the work of healing was far from over. While the guilty verdict brought a sense of closure for many, it also left unanswered questions about how to prevent such injustices in the future. For Walter Grayson and others who had fought tirelessly for accountability, the challenge now lay in turning lessons learned into lasting change. Walter spent his days much as he always had, tending to his garden, feeding the birds, and taking leisurely walks around the neighborhood. But beneath this quiet routine was a man transformed by his experience. Once hesitant to draw attention to himself, Walter embraced his role as an advocate for justice. He continued speaking at schools, community events, and even state conferences, sharing his story with anyone willing to listen. His message remained simple yet powerful. We all have the power to make a difference, if we choose to. One of Walter's proudest achievements came when local leaders announced plans to establish a permanent memorial in the town square honoring victims of police misconduct. Designed by students from the high school art program, the monument featured etched portraits of individuals whose lives had been impacted by systemic injustices. At its center stood a plaque inscribed with words chosen by Walter himself. "Let us remember the past not with anger, but with hope. For every act of courage brings us closer to a brighter future." The unveiling ceremony drew hundreds of residents, many of whom had never met Walter before. As he stood before the crowd, frail but resolute, tears glistened in his eyes. "This isn't just my story," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion swelling within him. "It belongs to all of us, to everyone who has ever felt powerless or afraid. Together, we can create a world where no one has to endure what I did." The memorial quickly became a gathering place for reflection and conversation. Families visited to teach their children about compassion and fairness. Activists held rallies there, calling for continued reforms in law enforcement practices. Even officers from the sheriff's department stopped by occasionally, laying flowers or pausing quietly to reflect on the responsibility they carried as guardians of public trust. The monument served as both a reminder of past wrongs and a beacon of hope for a better tomorrow. Meanwhile, the sheriff's department underwent significant transformation under new leadership. Carl Briggs retired shortly after the trial, citing health issues and mounting criticism of his handling of Richard's case. In his place stepped Sarah Martinez, a progressive reformer known for championing transparency and community policing. From her first day in office, Sarah made clear her commitment to rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the people of Willow Creek. Under Sarah's guidance, the department implemented several groundbreaking initiatives. Officers participated in immersive training programs designed to confront implicit biases and foster empathy. Role-playing exercises placed deputies in situations requiring patience and understanding, challenging them to see the world through the eyes of those they served. Monthly town hall meetings allowed residents to voice concerns directly to officers, fostering open dialogue and mutual respect. Perhaps most impactful was the introduction of a peer review system. Modeled after successful programs in larger cities, this initiative empowered officers to hold each other accountable. Teams of senior deputies reviewed body camera footage and incident reports, identifying areas for improvement and addressing potential misconduct before it escalated. Critics initially dismissed the idea as impractical, arguing that colleagues wouldn't report one another. Yet early results proved otherwise. Officers welcomed the opportunity to learn and grow alongside their peers. For Walter, these changes represented more than policy updates. They symbolized a shift in mindset. He often attended training sessions offering insights based on his own experiences. Officers listened intently, moved by his honesty and vulnerability. Many expressed gratitude for his willingness to engage, acknowledging that his story had changed how they viewed their roles in the community. "Before, I thought being a cop meant enforcing rules," one young deputy admitted during a workshop. "Now I realize it's about protecting people and earning their trust." Yet progress wasn't without setbacks. Some residents remained skeptical, questioning whether reforms would stick or fade away as memories of the trial dimmed. Others argued that focusing solely on law enforcement ignored broader societal issues contributing to inequality and injustice. Protests occasionally flared up, reminding everyone that vigilance was essential. Despite these challenges, most agreed that Willow Creek was moving in the right direction, one step at a time. As years passed, the town grew stronger, united by shared values of accountability and compassion. Children born after the trial grew up learning about the importance of standing up for what's right. Schools incorporated lessons on civic responsibility and human rights into their curricula, inspired by Walter's advocacy. Community organizations thrived, hosting events that celebrated diversity and promoted understanding. Slowly but surely, Willow Creek shed its reputation as a divided town plagued by mistrust and emerged as a model of resilience and renewal. Walter lived long enough to witness these transformations, though age eventually slowed him down. On sunny afternoons, he could be found sitting on his porch watching neighbors pass by. Young mothers pushed strollers while teenagers skateboarded along the sidewalk. Occasionally, someone would stop to chat, thanking him for everything he'd done. Walter smiled warmly, waving off praise. "I didn't do anything special," he'd say. "We all did this together." When Walter passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, the entire town mourned his loss. Flags flew at half-mast and businesses closed for the day out of respect. Hundreds attended his funeral, filling the church to capacity. Speakers included friends, family members, and local leaders, each sharing stories of how Walter had touched their lives. Sheriff Sarah Martinez delivered a heartfelt eulogy, calling him a guiding light who had shown everyone the path toward justice and unity. In the years that followed, Walter's legacy endured. The memorial in the town square became a cherished landmark, drawing visitors from neighboring towns eager to learn about his story. Students wrote essays about his bravery, and teachers used his example to inspire discussions about integrity and perseverance. Even law enforcement agencies across the country adopted elements of Willow Creek's reform efforts, crediting Walter for sparking a nationwide movement toward accountability. Though Richard Hargrove's name faded into obscurity, Walter Grayson's will forever shine brightly in the hearts of those who knew him. His courage reminded everyone that even the smallest acts of defiance can ignite monumental change. And so, as seasons changed and generations turned over, Willow Creek stood tall, a testament to the enduring power of hope, resilience, and collective action.